Although the person of Peter doesn't talk too much in the Passion, he is very important for the theological framework because Peter is actually we. Peter is the believer, the person between confession and denial. And so he is the model of the Lutheran sinner. He is justified and he wants to believe, and at the same time he is too weak to believe.
Peter is a very difficult character for the choir member who has to sing him because, of course, he has only a second to establish himself.
Sprach, ich bin's nicht.
Ich bin's nichts. That's all he gets to say.
The biggest sin that a human can commit, it seems, in the Gospel of John is not believing that Jesus has something to do with God the Father. And it's not, and in Lutheran thought, it's not just a matter of believing who Jesus is, but you must confess who he is. You don't just intellectually believe certain things about him, but you have to confess it. This would be a very meaningful spot to Lutherans in Bach's day, because what Peter is refusing to do is confess that he believes in Jesus, and that's a major sin.
A lot of his character is actually created through the evangelist in his descriptions of Peter, particularly when Peter finally realizes what he's done, when the cock has crowed, which we hear in a very vivid figure from the cello. And then the evangelist explaining that he cried, which is a remarkable, very extended melisma of great tortured pain.
The relationship between the biblical narrative and the reflection can be seen very well in one very small scene. When Peter follows Jesus, and then the aria follows, Ich folge dir gleichfalls mit freudigen Schritten. This is, of course, not Peter who is speaking. It is not Peter standing there and singing an aria, but this is the aria of the individual believer.
We then associate this aria with Peter as we see his character. Everybody knows Peter as the one who denied Christ 3 times. So it's ironic, or perhaps very poignant, that Bach should take this music and reuse it later in the Passion in the aria Sei gegrüßet, and again in Schreibe nicht der Judenkönig.
I think this is a particularly wonderful aria because it happens after just one line of the evangelist. There's just a tiny little phrase that the evangelist sings, and Simon Peter followed him also. And suddenly you have this wonderful, quite innocent aria, I think, of the soprano being chased by these 2 flutes very vividly as they follow each other. One of the wonderful effects that Bach produces is to have the 2 flutes in unison, which means the breaths can be staggered, so it's a kind of flawless line that continues throughout the aria.
Oftentimes my aria is recorded or performed as if it's the frivolous, cheerful aria in the beginning before everything goes sour. And I think in preparing it, I decided that it wasn't intended to be a toss-off aria that's supposed to be pretty and simple. I think it's supposed to be more anticipating what kind of path I would have to follow in Jesus' footsteps. And it's not silly, it's pretty intense.
And the soprano has this wonderful part where she has this chromatic ascending passage, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, wonderful, where after all of this da-da-da-da-da, gentle stuff, she's got to push uphill on this chromatic line, and it's not as easy, perhaps. And I think right away, that character, the soprano who will weep at the end in Zerfließe, another extraordinary aria, is experiencing for the listener the difficulty of this task of following, and the chromaticism does that.
We have the duality between this happy first part, this flowing melody when he talks about following, and the second part, the chromatic part, which depicts how hard it is actually to follow. And this second part gives a glimpse of what's going to happen. Peter and the believer still think, yes, we are able to follow Jesus. But the second half of the aria shows, no, there is something going to happen that makes it impossible for you to follow.